All right, thanks for sticking around for the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown. I'm Rich Walsh in for Bob Pompiani. Tonight we're a couple days away from training camp in Latrobe, and that'll be our top topic for tonight's show. And we have an all-star panel for you tonight. Andrew Fillipponi and Chris Mueller from the PM team. And in case we have Bucko fever, we brought in Jason Mackey from the Post-Gazette. We'll get to the Pirates in a couple segments. We're going to start with the Steelers right now. And our first topic, our #1 topic of the day tonight is I want to talk a little bit about Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett right now doesn't look to be the starter, Pony. Mitch Trubisky looks to be the starter. Where does he fall on the depth chart? And where should he fall on the depth chart heading into camp?
He should be their starting quarterback, I think. He's better than the other two guys. Rudolph is five wins in his career. One of those was a game that he got benched in for Duck Hodges. He stinks. He's a lame duck. I think he's going to get Landry Jones at some point here where he gets cut before the season starts if they can't trade him, and I don't know who would want him, honestly. And then as far as Trubisky goes, there's this image rehab with him that I'm still struggling with, where because he watched for a year, he's now a much better quarterback. Because he watched, because he didn't do anything. Makes no sense to me. If Pickett does not start the season as the quarterback, he will be their starting quarterback by October 1st, and he'll prove over that stretch of games that he was the best quarterback on their roster all along.
October 1st?
Yes. Yep.
Bold call.
I mean, I agree with the Trubisky part. I don't understand the image rehab on him at all. Like, he sat behind Josh Allen, went 6 for 8 and threw an interception in games
Allen
that
said he
mattered.
was the best athlete on the team.
That's wonderful.
Right?
I've heard so many great things about Mitch Trubisky, what an athlete he is. First of all, that's Allen being nice because he's a better athlete than Mitch Trubisky. He wouldn't have been in Buffalo if he could play quarterback because the Bears would have found a way to make it work. I think Pickett, to answer your first question, should be second, though, on the depth chart heading into camp. I, like Andrew, think he will acquit himself the best and show that he's the best guy on the roster. But where I differ from Andrew is I have no problem making a rookie show in a real environment, in camp, in preseason games, that he's got what it takes. I don't have any problem with not handing him the starting job just because. He wasn't #1 overall. He wasn't Joe Burrow. He wasn't Trevor Lawrence. Got picked 20th. Teams that might have drafted a quarterback did pass on him. So prove you can beat Mitch Trubisky in a tomato can named Mason Rudolph, and then you can have the job.
What if I said Mason Rudolph was going to be the? Would that go over
You
well?
might be the only one in Pittsburgh
yeah,
to
probably
say that,
the only
but-
one to say it. I don't
Yeah.
believe that. One of the things that I don't understand about this is why we have to have a set pecking order now. I mean, I guess that's what the conversation
You don't want him to be
is.
the third quarterback, though, because then he doesn't get
No,
all
I don't
the
want
reps,
him to be
right?
the third
Yeah.
quarterback at all, but I would like to see them battle it out a little bit during camp and see what shows up. I mean, if Kenny Pickett is good enough to start, he should start. Game 1. I don't automatically want to resign myself to seeing Kenny Pickett being on the bench because, like, that's theoretically what makes the most sense. But I don't automatically want Mitch Trubisky to be the starter just because of the athleticism stuff or whatever we've heard coming out of Buffalo.
Do you really think Rudolph warrants even a chance here?
No.
Okay.
No.
As long as you're not making it a three-man race, fine. That's fine.
It is not a three-man race. What I want, honestly, and I think camp competitions are a lot of times extremely overblown. Whoever the best quarterback is, play him. If you jockey them back and forth, if Kenny Pickett struggles a little bit, play Mitch Trubisky. That, to me, is the benefit in this situation. You don't have to have a hard and fast starter.
So, obviously, it's a pretty important preseason. These preseason games are pretty important, Chris. Do you think Mason Rudolph is on the team at the end of camp?
No. At the end of camp, maybe. But somebody's going to get hurt somewhere in the NFL. There's going to be a veteran team that needs a veteran backup, and they're going to get desperate enough either at the end of camp or after one preseason game to say, here, we'll bring in Mason Rudolph. I would be shocked, let me put it this way, if he is with the team when the regular season starts. I would be dumbfounded, actually. I mean, he just feels like somebody for whom everything he does for the next month plus is an audition for another NFL team, and that's how it should be. I don't know, I think I speak for everybody up here. I know I speak for Pony. I'm just astounded when people still say, oh, he's going to show everybody what he's got and take that starting job, take the bull by the horns. He's had his chances. He stinks. He's not good enough. If he had played well in that Detroit Lions game, maybe I'd have said something different. They threw the ball, 50 times
Yes.
with him? He one-hopped a ball that would have won the game? Yeah. Come on.
And Tomlin threw him under the bus for it.
He wouldn't even be a topic of conversation if not for the first-round grade nonsense.
Jason, you cover the Pirates. Could you go down to spring training and watch guys take ground balls in BP and determine who was going to be the starter off of that?
No, probably not.
Well, right. So that's why the training camp.
No, but
thing
what I'm saying is
the training
fungible,
camp.
Andrew.
The training camp practices, though, are the most overrated analysis of who a starting quarterback can be, and you know that. They show up in Latrobe the first week. What are they doing? There's no pads on. So let's throw that week right out. The next week, they'll have pads on for a couple of days. Are you telling me that they're going to determine a depth chart, who's first and who's second, based on what they do in 11-on-11 drills? Come on. They're not.
They
That's
will
ridiculous.
if Pickett looks really bad. They'll put him second and anchor him there. I think he can lose any chance at the starting job in camp.
If Mitch Trubisky throws 3 interceptions on the first 3 plays of 11-on-11 drills, he will still be their starter in their first preseason game. I'm convinced of that.
Well, the first preseason game, but then you move after that, and then after
Well,
that,
right,
and then after that. I mean, all of those practices should just be getting you to the first game.
Exactly. All I'm saying is that the job is going to be determined in what happens in those 3 preseason games, not what happens on the practice fields in Latrobe.
Do you think Pickett's going to get a fair shot in those games?
He better.
I think it'll get a fair shot. I do.
I mean, do you think he's going to, do you think Trubisky starts the first preseason game and then maybe Pickett gets to start the next one?
I would say that's how I think
Is that the most equitable way to do it?
That's what I would think so.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, I think that's completely fair. And honestly, for them, the best option is probably for Pickett to be their starter, and for Trubisky to show, well, what if somebody gets hurt around the NFL? Somebody calls on Trubisky, they're able to make something out of that, and they go with Pickett in either Rudolph or somebody else as a backup. And Pickett shows he's good enough.
It's just so weird to me. I know every sport is different. There's apples to oranges comparisons. Jason covers a sport where the shortstop gets better by playing, by repetition. He goes out there. If he goes 0 for 4, who cares? He takes something away from that game. It helps him in the next game. And yet I hear people tell me with Pickett, well, if he plays and he throws 2 interceptions and they lose, that's going to ruin his career. Come on. You're honestly telling me that a guy standing there and watching is going to eventually make him a great quarterback? If Patrick Mahomes had started week 1 for the Chiefs, if they didn't have Alex Smith, what, his career goes up in smoke? I just don't believe that.
So I agree with
Ben
you
Roethlisberger, if he had sat out all of 2004, would he have won 3 Super Bowls instead of 2? I just don't buy this whole make him wait. Pickett, to me, he's not someone that's immature or green or lacking experience. If he was, well, then maybe you make him
He's lacking NFL experience in their minds because he hasn't taken an NFL snap just to play devil's advocate.
Well, then to play devil's advocate, they shouldn't have started Najee week 1. They shouldn't have started T.J. Watt week 1. They shouldn't have started Terrell Edmonds week 1.
Are any of those positions equivalent to quarterback in terms of the responsibilities heaped on the player? No.
Wasn't Alan Faneca the guy that said when someone asked him the question, not excited?
Why would we be excited? He's
about
a
a rookie court. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think
times
that's
have
the
also
Steelers' MO.
changed since then, too. To Andrew's point, I mean, teams are more willing
Rookies
to play.
play now.
Yeah, and if he shows that he deserves to play, he should play. They shouldn't automatically redshirt him for a year. That's
I
senseless.
think it's the Steelers' MO. I think that's what they're going to do, obviously. That's what they've done.
Well, when you say Steelers' MO, whose MO are you talking about? Because Tomlin plays young players. Are you saying
Has
the
he
owner?
played young quarterbacks, though? I'm saying quarterback position's a little bit different. They have played rookies, right?
Well,
He
hold
hasn't
on,
had
though,
an opportunity
hold
to
on,
play
though, but
young
you are
quarterbacks.
not basing it. You can't say Tomlin. Exactly, Tomlin's
Because
never had it.
you're right,
So
he's
you
never had
can't
the
say that's his
situation.
MO or it's not his MO. We don't know his MO with young quarterbacks, but we
Rooney
know
still
his.
owns the team.
Well, so you think the owner's going to tell the coach what to do?
I think
Okay,
the
that's
owner
different.
absolutely might have a hand in this. Yeah, when people say that's the Steelers' way, it's been the Rooneys owning the team and being conservative like that.
Going back to the preseason games and rethinking it, what the Steelers and Mike Tomlin are going to do, I think Trubisky starts the first 2 games. Pickett starts the
Well,
last
that's not
game.
an equitable competition.
Yeah,
then.
so I think
that's setting
that's
it
what
up
it's
to
gonna
say,
be.
hey, Mitch Trubisky's going to start week 1.
They're going
come
to
hell or
give
high
him
water.
every opportunity to be the starter.
Who?
Mitch Trubisky.
They've got way more invested in Pickett. Why would you want to put your eggs in a Trubisky basket?
Money. Don't you follow the money a lot?
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
money's Pickett.
The money's picking in the
Yeah,
amount.
but
Yes.
Trubisky's the safer bet.
Yeah.
I mean,
Trubisky can win games
do you
now
think-
with a
do you guys
defense
both
that's
think-
the highest paid defense in the NFL.
He could also lose
win you
games, though. He's proven that he's capable of
could.
losing games with a great defense. And as Pony and I have talked about on the show, your best chance to win with a rookie in the NFL period is with a precocious rookie quarterback on a cheap deal. If you think you can win with this defense, and I'm sure Tomlin does, that he's assembled in the brain trust, you got to play the guy that you think is going to give you the best chance.
Why can't Pickett run an offense like Mac Jones last year in New England?
I'm
Great
not saying that he can't.
Okay.
I just don't think. I'm just like looking at what the Steelers have done in the past. I don't
do you think that would be the right decision by the Steelers then? If you're saying you're basing it off of what they've done in the past, based on everything we've said, do you like that move by them?
I think they go with. If it's me, I go with Trubisky to start the season, and see at some point where that first half of the season takes you. And if he's 0-4, 0-5, 1-4, then you maybe make the switch and then go with the future.
It'll
I
be
agree
the
with
most
that.
harmonious locker room, though. I mean,
I give the
he's
veteran
ultimate good
every
guy.
opportunity to win games at
Well,
first.
no, I mean,
and
everybody
let
in
the
that
guy
locker room is
learn
going to understand
behind
if you
you.
start 1-5 and he's
Yeah.
not very good and you turn things over to
I
Pickett. If
pulled the-
anything, I would look at it. Why
would
are we
want
waiting
that.
until 1-5?
So
the
let's
record at
also
0-2.
have that
Yeah.
same thing apply to wide
I'm
receiver.
fine
We
with
got to
that.
give Gunnar Olszewski every opportunity to be the slot receiver over George Pickens.
I think that's a bad analogy, though.
Why? The guy, he barely played college football last year, Pickens. Did he
Can't we
not?
look at it and say whomever is better at these stages is going to play more? Like, is that an oversimplification? I realize that practices are what they are. I'm not
I agree
propping
with
them
you,
up as
Jason.
the Super Bowl. It's just,
That's why
if Kenny Pickett is better, play him.
And he
if
will
Mitch
be.
Trubisky
Let's
is better,
see how
play
camp
him and
unfolds.
just keep
maybe,
going.
Maybe he does. Maybe he is a starter. Maybe he wins them over in the preseason, and maybe I'm wrong.
You know,
But
there
I
is a
think-
new GM in town, so maybe he'll get disgusted with all these quarterbacks and call up somebody that might have been run off by the last GM.
Oh, maybe we'll get to that subject coming up
Oh,
next.
boy.
We can take a break here. We'll continue our Steelers coverage after these 2 minutes.
Number 1 Cochran Sports Showdown is brought to you by Number 1 Cochran. Go one better.